My name is Father Edmund Crane. I am 71 years old. For 38 years, I served as a parish priest in the Diocese of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and for 19 of those years, I held a secondary appointment that almost no one outside the church knew about. I was a trained exorcist. I want you to understand what that means before I tell you what I saw, because the weight of what I am about to describe only makes sense if you first understand that I was not a man who believed in things easily. I was not superstitious. I did not startle. I had sat with the dying. I had held the hands of men as their minds came apart. I had administered last rites in emergency rooms and prison cells, and I had never once felt what I felt in that room. I am telling you this now because I am old, and because silence has a weight that compounds over time the way debt does, and because there is a woman named Marguerite who is still alive and who has never once in 22 years been told by anyone in any position of authority that what she experienced was real. I am here to tell her, and anyone who will listen, that it was real, that I saw it, that I cannot explain it, and that the institution I served handled it in a way that I am no longer able to defend. If you feel something pulling you to stay with this testimony, please do. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so that when more voices like this one come forward, you will be there to hear them. These stories deserve witnesses. Stay with me. I grew up in Dunmore, Pennsylvania. That is a small borough just outside Scranton. Working-class neighborhood, mostly Irish and Italian Catholic families. My father worked in the rail yards. My mother cleaned offices downtown 3 evenings a week and sang in the choir on Sunday mornings. The church was not optional in our home. It was the architecture of everything. The rhythm of the week, the shape of the year, the language we use to understand suffering and joy and death. It was simply the water we swam in. I entered the seminary at 22, not out of crisis, not out of dramatic calling. I entered because I had grown up watching priests, and I believed, with a clarity I have never been able to fully replicate since, that the priesthood was the most serious thing a person could do with a life, that it was a commitment to stand at the edge of the human experience where people were most frightened and most alone, and to be present there with something more than words. I was ordained at 27. I was assigned to St. Anthony's Parish in Scranton, where I served for 11 years. In 1994, I was approached by Bishop Callahan, who told me that the diocese had identified me as a candidate for specialized training. He said the church had pastoral needs that required a priest with a certain temperament. Calm, grounded, not given to suggestion or imagination. He said he had watched me for several years and believed I was that kind of man. The training was not what you would expect from the films. There were no dramatic demonstrations. It was largely academic. Canon law, church history, the theology of spiritual warfare, the formal rite as prescribed by the Roman ritual. There was significant emphasis on discernment, on ruling out psychological and neurological causes first, always first. I was told that the vast majority of cases brought to an exorcist would turn out to have natural explanations. Mental illness, trauma, medication interactions, severe grief. I was told my most important function would be to recognize those cases and redirect them to appropriate care. The actual rite, I was told, would be performed rarely. In 19 years, I performed it 11 times. 10 of those times I can explain. Disturbed individuals who needed psychiatric intervention. Grieving people whose pain had taken on a spiritual shape because that was the only container available to them. One case involving a young man whose behavior turned out to be the early onset of schizophrenia. In each of those cases, I refer, I counsel, I stay present. I do not regret any of them. They were pastoral work in its truest form. The 11th case was in January of 2003. That is the one I cannot explain. The call came from a priest named Father Dominic Reyes, who ran a small parish in a rural part of the diocese, a place called Cold Brook, about 40 minutes north of Scranton. Father Reyes was 60 years old, experienced, theologically conservative, not a man I associated with alarm. When I answered the phone that afternoon, he was speaking very carefully, the way a person speaks when they are trying not to sound frightened. He told me there was a woman in his parish. He told me her name was Marguerite. He told me she was 44 years old, that she had been a practicing Catholic her entire life, that she had no history of mental illness, that she had raised 3 children largely alone after her husband died, and that something had been happening to her inside her home for the past 6 weeks that neither he nor her family could account for. I asked him to describe it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Edmund, I have been a priest for 35 years, and I do not have language for what I have seen in that house. I drove to Cold Brook the following morning. It was January, the ground was frozen solid, and the sky had the particular flat white color it gets in northeastern Pennsylvania when the temperature drops below 10 degrees. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long gravel drive off a county road. It was well kept. There were children's drawings still taped to the front window. Marguerite's youngest was 12 years old. She was staying with her grandmother while her mother received care. Marguerite herself was seated in the kitchen when I arrived. She was a small woman, dark-haired, quiet. She looked exhausted in the way that goes past physical tiredness into something structural, as if the fatigue had gotten inside the bones. She shook my hand. She offered me coffee. She was polite and composed, and there was nothing in those first 10 minutes that would have told you anything was wrong. I spent the first hour with her the way I always did in these assessments. I asked about her sleep, her health, her grief, her relationship with her faith. I asked about her children, her daily routine, her history. She answered everything clearly. She was articulate. She had a dry, quiet sense of humor. She told me she knew how she sounded to outsiders. She told me she had already seen a neurologist and a psychiatrist and that both had found nothing. Then she told me what had been happening. I will not describe all of it here. There are parts of what she described that I have never repeated to anyone, not because I was instructed to keep them confidential, but because I do not have a way to describe them that would not sound either fabricated or grotesque, and Marguerite deserves neither of those things applied to her experience. What I will tell you is this. She described events inside that house that she had witnessed herself, and that 3 other people had independently witnessed and separately corroborated without contact with one another. Her oldest son, her sister, and Father Reyes. On 4 witnesses describing the same events in identical detail without the possibility of coordination. And before I could say anything in response to what she had described, something happened in that kitchen. The temperature dropped. I know how that sounds. I know it is the most cliched thing a person can say in this context. I am telling you it happened. Not as atmosphere, not as my imagination supplying drama to an already charged situation. The temperature in that kitchen dropped with a speed and totality that I have never experienced in any other physical environment in my life. My breath became visible. I watched Marguerite's become visible too. She looked at me and she said quietly, "It is here right now." What followed lasted approximately 40 minutes. I performed the rite. I will not describe the specifics of what occurred during those 40 minutes, because I am not certain that describing them would serve any good purpose, and I am not certain I could do so without breaking down. I will tell you that I have replayed those 40 minutes more times than I can count over the past 22 years. I will tell you that there was a point in that room where I stopped performing a ritual and started praying with a desperation I had never accessed before, the kind of prayer that has nothing to do with words or procedure, the kind that is simply a human being reaching for something in the dark. And I will tell you that it ended. That when it ended, the temperature returned, that Marguerite sat across from me and we looked at each other for a long time without speaking, and that she said finally, "Is it gone?" And I told her I believed it was. If this testimony is sitting with you, if you feel it reaching into something real, please subscribe and ring the notification bell. More voices are coming. You should be here when they do. I filed my report with the diocese through the standard channels. I documented what I had observed. I documented the corroborating accounts from the 4 witnesses. I submitted it along with my formal assessment that the case, in my professional and theological judgment, warranted the classification it was given. 2 months later, I received a response from the bishop's office. The response thanked me for my service. It noted that the case had been reviewed. One had informed me that the diocese had determined that the events described were consistent with a heightened psychological state in a grieving individual, and that no further action or documentation was required. It told me that the file had been closed. No one followed up with Marguerite. No pastoral care was assigned. No one called her. She received from the institution I served the specific experience of being seen and then immediately unseen, of having the most terrifying weeks of her life acknowledged and then filed away. The message delivered to her, without anyone having to say it directly, was this: "What happened to you is not something we will stand behind." I called her myself, 6 weeks after receiving the diocese's response. She answered on the second ring. She sounded surprised that I had called. She told me she was doing better. She told me that the events had stopped after January. She asked me, with a careful politeness that broke my heart, whether the church had any official position on what had happened to her. I told her that the church had reviewed the case. She understood what that meant. I have thought about that phone call nearly every week for 22 years. I have thought about what I said and what I did not say and what I should have said. I should have told her that I believed her. I should have said it plainly and without institutional hedging. I believed what I witnessed in that kitchen. I cannot explain it using any framework I have available to me, theological or scientific or psychological. I cannot make it fit inside the categories that have organized my understanding of the world for over 50 years. All I can tell you is what I saw, what 4 other people saw, and that the institution I served closed the file and moved on. There is a particular cruelty in being told by the people who claim to speak for the sacred that your experience of the sacred does not count, that the thing you survived is too inconvenient to stand behind. Marguerite survived something real. She survived it largely alone, with her 12-year-old daughter staying with her grandmother and a priest she had known for 6 weeks as the only person who had sat in that room with her. I left active parish ministry in 2014. I live quietly now. I still pray. I am not sure that what I believe at 71 looks like what I believed at 30, and I think that is probably honest rather than shameful. I think the God I have been finding my way back toward in these later years is less interested in filed reports and closed cases than in the simple acknowledgement that something real happened to a woman in a farmhouse in Cold Brook, Pennsylvania, in January of 2003, and that she deserved to have someone say so. This is me saying so. If what I have just told you reached something in you, please subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell. Every testimony shared here is a voice that refused to stay buried. Make sure you are here to hear them. Marguerite, if you ever find this. I believed you then. I believe you now. I am sorry it took me this long to say it out loud, where someone else could hear. I do not know what was in that room. I know that I was there. I know that I was a man trained to be skeptical. It trained to find the natural explanation, trained to protect the institution's reputation before its own theology. And I know that in 40 minutes in a frozen kitchen in Cold Brook, I ran out of natural explanations. What was left when those ran out is something I have been sitting with for 22 years. I am still sitting with it. And if you have a story of your own that no institution has been willing to stand behind, subscribe to this channel, turn on the notification bell, and know that there is a place here where those stories are given the weight they deserve. I am Father Edmund Crane, and I have told you the truth.